Hi, everybody. We have the beautiful Kate King with us today, and I'm so excited to be talking with her and introducing her to you. Kate King is a licensed professional counselor, a board certified art therapist, and an author. She's got two books running, one of which is very relevant to me right now around becoming a new mom, and the other one, which is the Radiant Life Project. In addition, Kate is the founder of the Radiant Life Project, with her mission being to create a ripple effect of well-being and empowering joy in the world. How beautiful is that? Kate is widely known for helping her clients and audience learn to cultivate radiant lives for themselves that shine so brightly they impact and improve the lives of those surrounding them. Kate's work is filled with an expansive array of inspiring resources, tools, and practices that provide an accessible entry point into a life of greater authenticity, fulfillment, and illumination. So in the specific Radiant Life project itself, Kate's looking to engage and empower her audience with the skill base from her 15 plus years as a licensed clinical psychotherapist and board certified art therapist, as well as the wisdom that she's acquired through her own healing and growth journey in the school of life, I'm going to assume many lifetimes. Kate's work incorporates the fusion of brain sciences, diverse psychotherapeutic modalities, spiritual practices, creative expression, an attuned connection to provide a unique and effective strategy, not only for healing and growth, but for the true freedom that comes with authentic living. So I'm going to stop here and let Kate introduce herself to you and talk a little bit about what makes her glow from the inside out, and then we'll get into it.
Sounds great. First, just thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm just really passionate about this work, and it is comprised of a background as a licensed therapist, sort of taken into integration within my personal process, walking this talk, exploring the depths of the psyche and how it connects with the mental, spiritual, energetic, physical bodies to really create holistic well-being. And for each person, it looks really different. And I have a pretty wide array of offerings that I write about in my new book, and I teach in all of my offerings. That some of them are more therapeutic modalities like parts psychology, internal family systems work. Sometimes it goes into the creative lens with art therapy, and sometimes it's really just in the moment kind of intuitive conversation that leads me to support people with the big transitions in their lives, with the anxiety, the depression, the life kind of bafflement of the state of our world these days. And so my work is really just about wrapping a big love bubble around as many people as I possibly can, helping them elevate themselves to the next level of wellness that they're ready for, and really courageously look at the areas of their lives that might not be in full alignment or in deep authenticity, and start to evoke real change that helps to correct that and put them on a path where they can live authentically with high integrity, breaking generational cycles and patterns that they may be caught up in, and really just kind of growing that inner spark within their soul for the most magnificent life possible.
I loved how eclectic your work is. It's one of the things that I found very, not just curious, but playful when I was like doing the research on you. And I thought that my audience would really love that, because so many of them are creative. So many of them are pulled through like channeling and through the connection they have with their intuition into different areas. And that comes up a lot. Like, what idea do I work on first? What part of my divine mission do I, dedicate this season of my life into? And particularly, like you said, the courage of being authentic parenting. So much of what's out there in the space is around healing what happened with your mother, and not enough about stepping into the kind of mother you want to become and who you are and the identity you're going to create, whether that's with children or with your own projects. Or so when I was looking at your work, I was like, this is like, it's gonna be such a lovely fit. But for those of you that are eclectic, and I can hear the ears pricking, right, and you want to see how to make this work, then Kate King is your girl. So tell me how that works for you, because I can feel just how, like, being in the room with you is like an exercise in expansion. I can feel the curiosity, I can feel the energy, and I can feel how much you love. you know, how much you love the different things. And it's not a dabble, it's a really deep love for what you do. So tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you decide to transition from therapy into your own things? And how did that work for you with this insane amount of creativity?
Yeah, it's a good question. It really feels like a soul mission or life purpose that has been with me for my entire life. Ever since I was a child, I was very creative. I was also very interested in the human mind, what makes people tick, what makes them do the things they do. And I went through a pretty traumatic childhood in a lot of ways that felt like it was a giant classroom for learning, as I think all life challenges are. And as my life unfolded and I started to have awareness that the things that I'm being met with in life have such a deeper purpose. It's not just that life is hard and we're here until we die, just dealing with it. It's an invitation every single time something feels challenging, even to the smaller degree of just feeling triggered in a situation or feeling kind of ignited and reactive. Every time that happens, it's a reflection of self on some deep layer of basically understanding what within you still needs to heal and grow so you can reach your fullest potential and elevate beyond the base level that, so many people are at when they start their awakening process and they realize how much growth is really available for us. So in my own journey, I always worked with my own therapists. I always went to retreats. I do a ton of my own art making and writing processes. And it's really been a process of getting brave, because looking at your own stuff can be scary, and finding the right guides to support you along the way when you're doing that work and when you're starting to get honest with yourself about the areas that are still wounded or available for healing. It's important that you have the right support. And so a lot of my journey was coming into my own alignment with my community, having aligned relationships that are supportive and that don't perpetuate some of those patterns that might have kind of been adaptive in childhood, things like codependency, things like people pleasing that kept me really safe for a long time. But in adulthood, I don't need those patterns anymore, because I have a wise self that I can tap into and help me kind of have equilibration with the way that I relate to people. So it's been a process.
It's a huge deal too, because my work is mostly in the spiritual sphere. One of the things that I did very much when I was designing like the medical intuitive course was balance it with so much that I'd taken from my years training as a therapist, because in the spiritual world, there's very little feedback, there's very little accountability, there's a lot of bypassing and sometimes toxic positivity. And there's also like unrealistic expectations around growth, where instead of it being long-term sustainable growth, it's normally only like celebritified instant, which you 100% get and you will see, but it's not like the one size fits all, or what happens for the majority of people, right? It's, I think, more what sells than what is most people's experience of their life spiritual journey and evolution. So particularly the support, I think that's such a deep thing to speak to an audience that's been told they should be able to do it all by themselves. They shouldn't need that support and that supervision, which I've taken for granted because I had, the counseling, the psychotherapy. It's part of what you need to be able to get your qualifications. And it's quite different introducing that into the spiritual circles in the beginning, because they're not used to that level of, like you said, support, but also like visibility, right? Because you can't hide or wear a mask forever. If somebody's with you and there's real companionship, that mask doesn't last.
Right.
The stuff comes whether you're ready for it or not.
Right.
So I'm going to let you choose which road you go down, but it's such a beautiful and important thing to bring up, because in my audience, I come across that a lot, especially because they blame themselves. They go into that victim conscious. Why am I not progressing? But they don't believe they deserve help. So it's a very important area to speak to.
I think what you're speaking to as well is the holistic nature of this type of work, that it's not just spiritual work. It has to happen in the physical body too, because we are incarnated here in 3D, in human form, and we're doing work here that is for the greater evolution of our soul, but it's only learning that we can do when we're in the physical body. Otherwise, we wouldn't need one. So there's a lot of learning that is really important for integration between the mind, body, and spirit, and having those systems all on board, all doing the work simultaneously is the key to the healing. So if someone is really interested in physical fitness, but they're not really thinking about their mental health or their spiritual well-being, that's only one facet. And so until they start to bring all of those pieces in and see themselves as a systemic being that has so many dimensions and fractals, then it's sort of lopsided in that way. And so I think for people who are feeling stuck in their growth process, that would be the first question that I would ask them is, how much are you attuning to all the aspects of yourself versus having a narrow focus on only one?
I think, yeah, I think that this idea that if it's very symptomatic approach versus a holistic approach. If there's a problem in your life, then you focus on the problem instead of realizing that the problem is the effect, not the cause.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So
And I think it's also part of our societies that we focus on problems and we don't tend to notice the light and the elements that are really working. And I think we're adaptively wired that way by Mother Nature, because if we know what the problem is, then we know how to keep it at bay so that we can survive, because ultimately nature is all about survival. But because we have the evolved human brain with our prefrontal cortex, it can be more than just survival for us. We're capable of higher level thinking, higher level connection, really incredible depths. And to bring all of that on board means if something's not working in your life, noticing also what is working in your life so that you can bring in more of that and grow it like a pilot light. You can help to fuel it so that it can really start to roar with brilliance instead of burning low. Because when we burn low, we kind of disable ourselves on an intrinsic level by not having enough fuel. And the way that we fuel ourselves is by bringing in more of that light. And that's to balance out the things that aren't working. Nobody is perfect. Nobody is all light. We have to have shadow, and the light and the shadow together need to be in combination and in synergy for the growth process.
yeah, the light and the shadow do need to be in balance 100%. And I love what you're saying about letting yourself be, giving yourself a chance. You're not a project. You're a human being. And a huge part of that is, like you said, trusting life, trusting that the divine curriculum is perfect. So it comes up so much because I teach, what I teach is medical intuition. So my audience is used to me talking a lot about metaphysical connections between disease and the physical body and the holistic integrations. It's like, if your finances is messed up, the stress then causes manifestations in the physical. If the romance life is, so it's following the breadcrumbs, or the traumas, if you call breadcrumbs traumas, to where the root is, and then kind of pulling that out. And the shadow work is a big aspect of sickness, because you're only as sick as your secrets, right? Even from yourself. So it's a very it's a beautiful journey, and it's that expansion. But at the same time, I think exactly because there's so many ideas, and especially if you are connected, there's so many shiny things. It's important to be like, yes, that is a good idea, but does it fit into my particular space? Does it fit into my particular journey? Or is it not the right timing or the right energy, so that you can keep that fire burning authentically, instead of it, looking good to everyone else, but you're kind of drowning on the inside.
Right. And that's a really profound level of alignment to be able to continue to be open to possibilities and notice when there are doors that open for you and potential that becomes available for you. And also be attuned enough to yourself to know if that's a yes for right now. And just because it may not be a yes for right now doesn't mean it's not a yes ever. It just means that in the circumstance that you're in, on the level that you're at, it just might not be a fit. And if you force it, it could end up just being really arduous, really draining, and potentially something that you have to pivot again. So I think that flexibility is really important with being able to align with what feels like a yes and with what feels like a no, just sort of putting it on the side. Because in the world of expansion, there's also an element of contraction that needs to happen that's really important for growth. Just like a rubber band, if it's expanding all the time and it's never contracting, it will snap. So we need to do the same. We expand when we grow, and then we have to contract a little bit to integrate what we've just learned. And with each expansion, the starting place becomes broader. So you're expanding then from a new baseline and contracting a little less. And with each iteration, the growth continues exponentially. But the contractions are an element of that is so crucial because it keeps us from overextending and getting burned out. Because the spiritual journey can be an element of burnout for people, just like any other work in the world. And I think sometimes people forget that. And there's just this kind of continuous movement of deeper and more and expand and expand and expand. And they forget that we are limited by the human body. We're not in ethereal form right now. And so we have to honor that. We need our rest. We need nourishment. We need periods of integration. And so the contraction is really important.
I really think that's so powerful how you said that. And it makes so much sense, especially if you think about how muscles work. It's exactly like that, you know? You grow to a certain extent by testing, but then without that contraction, you know, you get a sprained ankle or a sprained leg or a sprained arm, and you have to grow in proportion, you know, and that's a really deep way of putting it. And it's particularly for my community, because when it comes to healers, especially of disease, when you have a lot of people that you're working on dense stuff with, and you're going to hospitals and, you know, children's wards where you're potentially working with one person, but you may be surrounded by 20 or 30 people who are not well. Right. And so much of the work is clearing the wounded healer archetype, right? Is clearing these old generational beliefs that you have to get sick or absorb the disease in order to be of service and be of light. And so many of the most, like, there's some incredible healers. And the first ever instant healer that I met, where he could just touch you and your disease would disappear, he was physically ill. He actually had ME because he was so burnt out. He'd taken on so many illnesses. And I was so young, I didn't have any understanding that that's what was going on. Right. But the more I grew into healing, the more I realized it was not him, it was systemic. Right. Even with Louise Hay, it starts with cancer or with, and you can see it going across the healers, because unless you have that resolved, especially that shadow within you, you can't be in the presence of somebody in that space and not be like, oh. So it's a very, like, that contraction. And I've actually never in all of my studies heard somebody talk about the contraction with the love that you just did there.
I do love the contraction. I think it's such a crucial element, because that's kind of the cocoon where you get to cozy up and let yourself release the pressure for forward movement. And you get to just be cozy with what you've just accomplished and really sit with it. Integration is a big deal when you're moving through the growth layers, because if you don't integrate, it's more of what you were talking about at the beginning, like those fad diets, where the spiritual growth is not just instant, it's not a light switch. And the integration allows you to really fully, completely understand and make your last learning part of you before you move on to the next learning. And if we move too fast through those layers, there's no way that it can all become part of us. It's just too much for our systems. So we have to pace ourselves and know that there's really no destination in this work, and there's no way to predict the work that's ahead of you, because we are part of a quantum multiverse of possibilities. And there are so many potentials for the way our growth will express itself. There's no right way. There's only the moment and what feels aligned in that moment. And you will not know what's aligned unless you've integrated what came first.
I was doing another interview this morning, and we got really deep into the Course in Miracles principle of self-hatred masquerading as self-love, and how only really by developing your self-awareness can you tell the difference, because things can really be illusions, and you can very much convince yourself that something is loving when actually it comes from fear, like you said, the fad diet, or it's not a representation of nurturing or loving your body. And then neglect is just another aspect of fear. No matter what you're covering the shit with, right? It's still shit. You have to go into what the core issues are. So it's the fear mind is tricky.
Yeah. And I think this is where forgiveness and grace comes in, that you do the best you can on the layer that you're in. And if later on you realize that you were looking at your work through some sort of distorted lens, or you were flooded by fear and you just didn't realize it until after the fact, that's when you take that as another lesson, and you have forgiveness for yourself for not knowing things before you could possibly know them. Right? We can't expect our past selves to know and understand what our current selves do. That's the process, is we had to get from that past self to this current self. And this current self, no matter how wise and expansive we feel, will be a past self for some future self that's going to know even more. And so if you see yourself as just a series of links in a long chain of your soul's evolution, we're each just somewhere in the middle. And we may find out that the things we know to be true now are illusions, and that's okay. We correct and we pivot as we go. The more we learn, the better we do, and the more we update.
Let's talk a little bit about the Radiant Life Project. What is it that you do in this? How is it that you serve and that you help? Is it more of a health thing? Is it more of a mental health thing? Is it a combination of everything? Because the name, it doesn't really give me depth as to what ground you're covering. So I'm going to open up, because your book's coming out as well.
Yes. So it was born out of a period where I was in real transition, actually, and having a kind of death rebirth cycle of my own. During the COVID pandemic, I was working as a full-time clinical therapist for just so many people in this really difficult time. And I ended up getting quite burned out. And instead of just pushing forward like society recommends, I stopped and I took a 5-month sabbatical from my private practice, which is kind of unheard of in the mental health field. It's not really a group of truly very healthy people, because it's based on a Western medical model, right? Where you just keep going forever. And so I took that time and I really reflected on what I was doing that wasn't working for me. And it's similar to what you mentioned before with that wounded healer archetype of just taking on so much to try to transmute it and alchemize it, but at the cost of myself. So during that time that I was away from my practice, I became really clear about the offerings that I can give that are also healthy for me, and the way that I can shine my light into the world that doesn't dim it. And so now I have a small clinical practice that's actually sort of getting smaller, and I'm moving more into the depth coaching realm of things that is more wellness oriented instead of pathology oriented. So I'm focusing on what's working for people. I'm focusing on helping to nurture and cultivate the inner light within people so that they can reach their full expression. And so it does have a mental health aspect. It has a deep psychological aspect that's really transformative. It has a spiritual component. It's very creative. not only through art, but through whatever creative expression feels aligned for each person. And that can look differently. And in some ways, we really have to get curious about what creativity looks like for different people, because they're not sure. And maybe they're unaware that the gardening they've been doing is their creative pursuit, or their pull toward dance or music is the way they express creatively. So the Radiant Life Project is about helping people to look around their world, look around their psyche, and decide who they want to be in the world, and then activate that spark so that they can move forward with the intention of their highest good. And then it can ripple outward beyond them to the people that they love and care for, and hopefully create a meaningful impact in the community at large. It all starts with us, and then it goes outward from there. So the book, The Radiant Life Project, it's actually available for pre-sale now,
Oh, wow.
which is so exciting. And it's essentially a how-to manual that is everything I know from my 15 years of therapy, as well as my personal journey of the last 20 plus years of my own therapy and inner work. And it's just a really accessible resource that doesn't cost very much money and doesn't require that you show up to an office or that you do it in any certain way. You can kind of pace yourself, and it is a huge download. It's a masterclass of inner work and personal growth that I'm just trying to gift to anyone who feels ready or inspired to step into this kind of work.
We're going to put the links to everything underneath this, guys. So don't worry, the links to pre-order, or by then, I think we're definitely going to release this before her book comes out, but we'll switch it to the correct link at the appropriate time. Don't worry if you're listening to this in the future or on quantum levels, because I know some of you are probably up to that. Yeah, don't worry, everything's going to be underneath. Yeah, gosh, so you brought up a few incredible points there. So it's interesting how two hearts collide sometimes. So I had a very similar awakening at the beginning of COVID, because like you, I was doing a healing practice, but because in the UK, they shut the hospitals down, you know, and people didn't have anywhere to go. I went from having a small practice to suddenly having one that there was no way for me to keep up. Everything was booked almost a year in advance. And that's when I shifted from one-to-one more into group work, because I was doing like small classes before. But it's also when there was an identity shift into other people have to do this, because with illness, it's progressive. So the longer they wait, the worse it gets. And you can't hurry someone on their health journey because someone else is waiting, right? So you need more practitioners. And that's when I was like, I can't hide anymore. I have to be more visible, which was such a crisis of authenticity in the middle of COVID. Because here was the whole world going like, be afraid. And suddenly I was sitting there going, okay, I'm going to come out of the closet and be like, you're the power in your body. You can heal anything. And if we end up in jail, we end up in jail. And right there, right, it shows the past life trauma. I was like, okay, we're going to try, but we're going to see what happens. And then what threw me into exactly the point that you're describing, where the burnout had the potential, was I found out I was 16 weeks pregnant with my son. And I was like, okay, I can no longer put my health on the altar or put my my light on the altar, because I won't just burn me out. There won't be anything left for him. And gosh, I'd say it's still not easy. Authenticity requires boundaries, right? Really loving and strong boundaries. And in a world that still really expects particularly young women to please, you know, you do get challenged on it a lot. But when you have your core values, it gives you a strong spine. And otherwise, I think when you start quantum jumping, I didn't know that's what it was called when I was younger. But one of the reasons I became a medical intuitive is because the more I got into my own healing journey, one of the things that happened long after I'd healed my autoimmune disease was that when I started looking into the future and speaking to my future self, is that my future self would tell me, change this so that you don't have arthritis, change this so that you don't develop Alzheimer's, change this so there's no risk of heart disease. And I started making changes now so that I wouldn't have to go through that later on. And people go, well, you're healthy. And it's like, yeah, but it's not a superficial thing. It's not about looking good. It's about sustainable long-term quality of life. Right? I'm not going to steal from my future self because of some trauma I'm having in the moment. I'm going to be present with the pain instead. And that was, that presence that you're describing, and that courage to be authentic when there's so much pressure to follow one way, right? It's a very vulnerable thing.
Absolutely. It was interesting too, because when I announced my sabbatical, there were all kinds of responses that people had because I was mirroring something to them about themselves. That either some people said, I wish I could do that. I admire this. I feel stuck and I don't know how, but I admire it. Other people had a response like, how dare you not do this work at your own expense? How dare you stop? And then there were certain clients who felt really abandoned, and there were, all of these different responses. And so it was really powerful for me to remain anchored in myself and in the knowing that I entered my sabbatical with really high integrity, with the way I closed with all my clients, with the way that I communicated this to my community. I felt in real alignment. And then I was able to just allow all of the projections, any energy that was not mine, I was able to just let it run off of me so that I could be really clear about who I am in this vantage point. And I am not the same healer I was when I started my therapy practice. So it makes sense that I would need to create a new version of my healing offerings that's in alignment with who I am now, not who I was then. And it's possible that in the future, I may have to pivot again and realign in a new way. And holding an open mindset allows me to serve better, because if I'm constantly serving from an honest and resourced and passionate place, then I help better. Whereas when I'm serving from an obligatory or burned out or exhausted place, the help that I'm giving may not be as accessible, it may not be as genuine, and energetically, it probably doesn't do as much. So it's wasting everyone's time. So I think for
people can feel it as well. Like there's a resonance to that. And I think you also attract people, like you said, who are in that space where they can't really give their all either, because you're in a place where you can't give your all too. So it's really deep thing.
It is. And I'm noticing now that I'm feeling rejuvenated and I'm ready. I'm offering retreats. I'm offering public speaking. I've really expanded the way that I give these gifts. Now I'm giving free daily videos on social media. I'm just trying to kind of give in ways that help larger audiences, that have a larger ripple effect. And what it's doing is it's attracting more of what I feel capable of and more of the frequency that I'm aligned with. I'm not attracting the low vibrational frequency or the people who don't really want help, but they're saying they want help. They just want you to do it for them. I'm not attracting that anymore. And so it's interesting that when I changed my wavelength, it's being mirrored back to me in ways that are really beautiful.
It's huge. Like it's quite a strange, for me, it was quite a strange transition, because some of it happened consciously, but a lot of it was just life purpose. So it's like momentum in the unconscious slowly bubbling up. Right. Because I think my guides and my angel, they know I have a practice. So it kind of filters nice and gently up to the surface as I'm going along. But very much this, you being allowed to be where you are, not having to always be who you were.
Yes.
Is that not being a lack of integrity, but actually as that being the integrity, right? The courage to be who you are in every season.
Yes.
That's
yes,
a profound thing.
Differently from who your parents want you to be, from who your society or your friends think you should be. Even your children project some vision of the mother they want you to be or not, right? Or what we carry, and then being able to really tease away anything that's not you and come into contact with who you are and who you want to be, what feels most in alignment for your soul's purpose and growth. And then doing that thing, even if it feels strange and unfamiliar, because the more we practice being ourselves, the more we become ourselves.
And sometimes, like what I is particular, like this is going to take us beautifully into your book on authentic mothering, because one of the things I realized after I became a mom was that I had to get to know who I was. And I thought I might change a little bit, but actually who I was before was just gone. It was such a strong shift in identity. And I remember having some really big arguments with my partner and him going, I don't know who you are. And me saying to him, well, welcome to the club. It's like, I don't know who I am either, right? That's something I'm working out. And you're going to have to figure that out as we go forwards. But I'm 100% not the person I was 2 days ago. So we're going to have to navigate this. And I think that was a shock to him as much as it was a shock to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that sometimes it's gradual, but sometimes it's like, bye, and that's it.
There's nothing like a new baby to really show you how many areas you still have left to work on, and point out the areas of growth, and also instigate really big change. A baby creates a before and after experience where you can't go back. There's no return. It's forward only. And I mean, the truth is, it's only ever forward only on any journey we're on. There is no going back, but having a new baby makes that abundantly clear. And I love to tell the new moms that I work with, when you birth your baby, you birth yourself as a mother. And so you are growing and changing and learning right alongside your baby in ways that you've never been able to do before, and you can't prepare for. You have no idea what it's going to feel like until you're there, and the challenges might feel harder. You might feel more capable of them. Everyone has such a different response, but you are rebirthed in that moment. And so is your partner, and so is your marriage, so is your family unit. It's a real time of transition where there was a then, and then there is a now, and they're quite different.
And every child is so different as well. You know, they bring their own energy. It's such a force of, you know, such a force of nature that it's not generally, this is why I believe in support on the parenting journey, but there's no one that can tell you with your kid, with that particular soul alignment or guidance. There's a huge amount of intuition involved.
Yes.
You know?
That's why I call it the authentic mother. I learned this with my two children. I have a 7 and a 9-year-old, and they are so very different from each other. And it's really interesting that I can't parent them the same way. And I'm the same mom, but I'm 2 different iterations of mom for each of them, depending on what they need and how they've shown up in their world with their soul's purpose. And I don't really know the role that I play in their soul's journey, but I trust that they're learning from me in the same way that I'm learning from them. And we have some agreement to do this together. And so we're going to provide each other with the spiritual lessons that we all need in order to grow and in order to experience this life that we're sharing.
I had so much on an unconscious level because I had really deep beliefs that I thought I was prepared for a girl. Not so much that I wanted one, but I felt like I would know how to help her become fully expressed as a woman. And then when I found out that I was going to have a little boy, I had this insane expansion. And even the colors I wore changed. And the energy was like so huge. And these spiritual books that because I'm an avid reader and like a podcaster, and like you, I love doing retreats and I love exploring. And I am a deep person, but the level of depth that my son took me to made the work that I'd done on the masculine look like child's play. You know, I went from like reading, you know, like David Data to suddenly being in, you know, the you know, like Three Mothers and the Gods in Every Man, and like the core underbelly of male shadow work, because it just, like I said, it pulls out parts of you didn't even know existed that are suddenly ready because you want to meet them. You know,
Yeah.
you want to really meet them. So it's a very, yeah, you say transformational, but because it's from within, and it's a co-creative process. it's hard to describe until you're in it, but when you're in it, you're in it.
Right. And it keeps transforming too. When my kids were babies, I was learning certain things. And now that they're 7 and 9, I'm learning different things. They're showing up differently. They've risen to a new place. I've risen to a new place, and we're meeting there. And I suspect at their next juncture, it's going to feel new again, and there will be new things to learn. And so it's not something that you figure out and then coast. It's something that is continually evolving. And I think that's a really beautiful mirroring of the spiritual and psychological growth process too, because even people who never have children, they are constantly evolving on all of these layers. And it may not be as obvious because you're not watching a human being change sizes and have to buy, a new pair of shoes every 6 months because they're growing, because you're growing, even if you don't have this instigator, which is the children. And it's nonlinear. And it's really complex, and the evolution process is always happening. We cannot stand still, even if we tried, and we cannot go back.
So are you doing 2 separate groups, or is it all running into the first group and then you're providing all of that there? How have you, like you said, integrated the 2 works together? Are they kind of enmeshed, or are they separate and intertwining? How did that create for you?
So the Radiant Life Project is like an umbrella, and the Authentic Mother is one shoot of that umbrella. So I have women's circles that are around authentic motherhood, that are around support for prenatal and postpartum work. And then I have another group that's about authenticity, not necessarily outside of motherhood, but it has sort of a broader lens and a broader focus under the Radiant Life Project, where it's not that really narrow kind of laser point on motherhood, which is really what you need when you're in those motherhood places that feel like they need excavation and support. So I have retreats that I offer that are holistic wellness oriented, that are creatively oriented, that are oriented around psychology, but it's a really big fusion. So depending on kind of what you're looking for, you can have as much specificity or kind of that subtle integration of all elements and get what you need in either way. And for the public speaking, sometimes I speak to people who want me to talk about one thing only, like just talk to us about motherhood. And other times they want me to talk about the 3 pillars of the Radiant Life Project, which are authentic integrity, aligned relationships, and abundant creativity. So I have a lot of different facets of the work, but it's all under that umbrella of having a radiant life with whatever that means to you, whatever you're carrying on your journey.
It's important because like clarity creates connection. So the clearer they are on how to work with you, and I have a strong feeling that my audience is going to resonate with you really deeply because I do, right? And you're always a mirror of that audience. So figuring out how they fit in this, I think I must, because of the medical intuitive course, we had 3 new mothers last year who went from like infertility to full blown, the babies are now here, which is so cool. And but a huge part of what we do as an offshoot, similar to you, is like the fertility program. And I put it in a separate space exactly because there's so much there, So there was a separate space just for going into intergenerational birth trauma, because 85% of us used to leave the world that way. Right? So it's a huge area and this is the thing about medicine type modalities, is that the area is so huge. It's just so huge. There's so much space for expansion. You could spend your whole life in one area, just on the liver or just on the heart or just on the throat, and you could be happy there because there's so much to discover. Right? So I hear you, and I feel such deep happiness when you talk about umbrellas. Because your body's an umbrella, right? It puts all the organs together and it's like a nice covering. But it's just that clarity, that it's all under the Radiant Life Project. And this is the space that you're moving within. And all of your previous work is nicely housed within there for people that still connect in those places of their journey. And they can still, still really love the work that you're doing and connect with you when they need you in the way that serves.
Yeah, they get to make this work their own in whatever flavor feels beneficial for them. That's what I really like about the Radiant Life Project is it's really adaptive. And so it can meet you at the level you're at, and then you can reread the book in 3 or 4 years, and then it will meet you at that level. So I think our psyche will allow us to see what we're ready for. And when we revisit old things, it's really beautiful to be able to build on them and add more layers and see how far we've come.
I am going to end this very juicy podcast on that note, that life will meet you wherever you are, and that every stage of growth is beautiful in its own way. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you, Kate. And you guys know where you can find her. Everything is underneath the link.
Thank you.